One of my favorite new movies is The Martian, with Matt Damon playing NASA astronaut Mark Watney. He's part of a mission to Mars, but tragically the team needs to evacuate during a sandstorm, and he accidentally gets left behind on the Martian surface without a ship. He has to figure out how to survive in this unfamiliar and chaotic environment until NASA can send a rescue mission, which might take a few years. So, he builds an entire greenhouse in what had been his base camp and begins growing food. As long as he is inside the greenhouse, everything is fine. He can breathe without his spacesuit, and he can help his little potatoes keep growing until he can eat them. But outside the thin greenhouse wall is the toxic chaos of the Martian atmosphere. And when that wall is ruptured, all that chaos comes rushing in, overturning the order that he had so carefully cultivated. This is the reality of our lives, albeit in miniature form. We live in the apparent order of a greenhouse, orderly and predictable, and we invest tremendous resources to make sure that the world that we experience remains orderly and predictable. Every once in a while, though, we discover that the world we experience as orderly is actually just a small island of order in a vast ocean of chaos. We deeply fear that chaos. One of the central ways our tradition praises the Holy One is as the one who brings order to chaos. Umesader et hakochavim b'mishmarateim berakia kirtzono. Literally, the one who orders the stars of the night sky in a tidy fashion, like a cosmic divine Marie Kondo. Of course, like most of religion, this liturgy actually tells us very little about the Holy One, but reveals deep truths about us. We like to perceive order in those stars. A wonderful article that my friend and our president, Jesse Lunenpack, shared with me explains what is possibly the quintessential aspect of being human. Imagining and planning for scenarios that have not yet happened is predicated on predictability. I can plan a menu for Shabbos dinner next week because I assume certain realities so thoroughly that I don't even ask, will the air be breathable next week? Or where will I be sleeping next Friday night? Or will we be living under military curfew then? I can assume the answers to those questions because for better and for worse, I live in a reality that I experience as predictable and orderly. However, when certainty is not available, our lizard brains go haywire, spurring us to move and get into a situation where we can feel safe. Safety is practically defined as having confidence about what is likely to happen next, combined with confidence that we have the resources to handle whatever might happen next. If a kid is running and unexpectedly falls and scrapes their knee, they experience chaos. They had, unknowingly, predicted that their next step was stable and that they would keep moving forward as they ran. In fact, the situation was not as predictable as they thought. That rock was actually loose, their step was not stable, and now they are crying on the ground with a skinned knee. An adult, however, probably wouldn't experience that moment as chaotic. Even if we couldn't express the particulars, we are confident that the blood will clot, the immune system will fight off any infections, and if needed, we can easily access additional resources like bacitracin or Band-Aid. In fact, more than we fear pain, we fear uncertainty about when pain will begin and end. Studies have shown again and again that uncertainty about whether or not our job is stable takes a greater toll on our health than actually losing our job. British researchers found that people who knew they would receive a painful electric shock felt less agitated than those who were told they had a 50% chance of getting a painful electric shock. As some of you might remember, some years ago, my wife was in the ICU with leukemia, which thankfully has been fully cured. I can say that now, but of course back then, I had no idea what was happening next, and the stakes couldn't be higher. So, of course, I laser focused on installing an outdoor thermometer and weather center in my backyard. I couldn't control Allison's illness. I couldn't really control the financial peril we were facing, but I could have complete and total control regarding which weather station to install, and even better, that weather station would ostensibly forecast what the weather was going to be like in the future, which is all I really wanted, to know that everything in the future was going to be okay. I needed something to convincingly tell me, yes, the sun will come out tomorrow. The thermometer was my teeny tiny greenhouse of order in the hostile and downright Martian sea of chaos that was my life at that moment. The weird thing, though, is that even though we fear chaos, we deeply need chaos. The most terrifying moments of my life have been the chaotic ones, but so too have been some of the most valuable, invigorating moments of my life. One of the best things I ever did with my life was spend months biking and camping with Allison. We traveled the West Coast and the East, not knowing what was in store for us on the next day, not even knowing where we were sleeping most nights. It's true that the unexamined life might not be worth living, but the opposite is true as well. The unlived life might not be worth examining. I balance my checkbook and I mow my lawn so as to keep things neat and orderly. But in the words of my favorite poet, Mary Oliver, I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. I want to live while I am alive. We survive by way of order, but we live by way of chaos. Our ancient Israelite ancestors had 49 days between liberation of the splitting at the Red Sea and receiving the yoke of the Torah at Sinai. We celebrate our liberation with Pesach. We celebrate the receiving of the Torah at Shavuot. And we celebrate those 49 intermediate days with the counting of the Omer. The Sfat Emet, a Hasidic master from pre-war Poland, teaches that those 49 days are a time of essential spiritual anarchy, and we need to hold on to them forever, because the chaos of those days is the source of Judaism's vitality and strength. I go hiking with my kids a lot, and there's a rope swing at one of the swimming holes we like to visit. When my kids found it, they were both terrified and desperate to get on it. Keep in mind, this swing is unmaintained, almost certainly illegal, and absolutely a liability nightmare. It's chaos, and that's what's appealing about it. I could see the obvious risks of letting them do it: injury, paralysis, death. But I could also see the less obvious risks of not letting them jump: fear, timidity, unnecessary risk aversion. Now, I know this might not be a popular opinion with the lawyers, but I'm not sure it's always better to be safe than sorry. More than occasionally, I think we feel sorry for how safe we've been. To answer the obvious question, I didn't let them on the swing the day we found it. I checked with friends of mine who grew up around here, I scoped it out, and I watched other people do it. Once it was clear that it was very, very unlikely that they would suffer any significant injury, we let the kids have at it. They had the time of their life and lived to tell the tale with nary a scratch. One day, I hope to be as brave as them and do it myself. The ancient rabbis of the Talmud were well aware of this tension. Too much chaos, and life cannot endure. Too much order, and life endures, but not necessarily a life that we would want to live. In the Talmudic volume of Sukkah, Rabbi Yochanan teaches that when King David began digging to build the foundation for the altar in the temple in Jerusalem, something incredible happened. The Tehom, the primordial chaos upon which the Holy One imposed order, and in so doing created the world, came rushing up from the center of the earth with tremendous ferocity and threatened to engulf the entire planet in a chaotic flood. When the Tehom surged upwards, King David used magic to calm the surging waters and save the world. That sounds good, but not so fast. The watery chaos known as the Tehom receded so deep into the earth that the wells dried up, crops failed, and human survival was again in peril, this time from too little chaos. So King David wrote the 15 Shirei Hamalot, the songs of ascent, to bring the water back up to a safe and useful level. No chaos can be as dangerous as too much chaos. And yet, in the past year and a half, we have faced a level of chaos that I, and I suspect many of us, have found not invigorating, but terrifying. Obviously, COVID has been and continues to be a chaotic force, upending order in our healthcare, our economy, our education systems, our lives. There were days earlier this summer when I, and perhaps many of us, thought that we could see a light at the end of the tunnel, only to discover that light was the headlight of an oncoming Delta train. There were days in January when it seemed entirely plausible that the American government and the order it provides could actually fall. And in June, a 12-story apartment building in Miami did fall down. It collapsed and killed nearly 100 people. Buildings fall, public health systems fall, and governments can and do fall. I am sure I am not the only one who has found the chaos of this pandemic and the past administration to be not invigorating, but terrifying. How do we live when we realize that the order upon which we rely is as thin as the mylar sheeting Mark Watney used to keep the chaos of the Martian surface at bay? Do any of us know the magic that King David used to keep the chaos at a tolerable level? My teacher, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, teaches how nearly 100 years ago, Thornton Wilder won the Pulitzer Prize for his novel, The Bridge of San Luis Rey. In it, Brother Juniper witnesses the catastrophic collapse of a bridge in Peru, which sent 5 people to their deaths. Now, Brother Juniper was a pious man, and he knew that God's justice was perfectly orderly. If these people died, there must have been a good reason for it, and he, Brother Juniper, was going to find it. So he investigated those who died and learned everything he could about their sins and foibles. If these people died before their time, that must mean ipso facto that they deserve to die. There is order in the universe, insists Brother Juniper, and my research shows that these deaths were not random, not chaotic, but orderly. They died for their sins, however minor or petty they might seem. Brother Juniper is proud of the work he's done, and he's delighted when it comes to the attention of the ecclesiastical authorities. And he expects to be celebrated for his faith and his defense of God's orderly justice. Instead, Brother Juniper and his book were burned at the stake for heresy. Why should this sincere act from a pious man be condemned as heresy? What is the sin in insisting that there is order in the universe, that neither our suffering nor our joy is the function of random chaos? After all, from the book of Devarim, from Deuteronomy straight through to William James, conventional religious thought holds that there is an unseen order in the universe, and that our supreme good consists in adjusting ourselves to live in harmony with that order. What was Brother Juniper's sin? The Rambam, Rabbi Moses Maimonides, addresses this exact question in his magnum opus, Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, which I learned with some of you this past spring. He argued that the reality that we know and experience, reality, is but a tiny fraction of the entire universe. Things are indeed somewhat orderly and predictable in our tiny sliver of the universe, but our reality is to God's universe what Mark Watney's greenhouse was to the Martian landscape, a tiny illusion of order in a vast sea of chaos. I pride myself on having an orderly garage. I've got firewood stacked over here, holiday supplies over there, camping gear in a box, each one carefully labeled so I can find the things I need. And it's great that I have 50 linear feet of well-organized shelving in my garage, but I live in a universe that is understood to be 100 billion light years in diameter. That little bit of garage order is a very, very, very small sliver of order in a very large chaotic universe. But that little bit of order soothes me. The human need to find order in chaos is so strong that one of the central precepts in Zen Buddhism is not knowing. Of course, we know things. I know that my name is Brent. I know that I'm standing in New York. I know that the Mets have not won the World Series since 1986. At a deeper level, though, there are things that not only do we not know, we can't know. Why did the Holocaust happen? Why do humans suffer? Why do babies die? Not knowing, which is sometimes thought of as beginner's mind, is the practice of continually setting aside fixed points of view and simply recognizing that right now, it's like this. Perhaps it's not all as it should be or as I desire it to be, but right now, it's like this. We hold on to understandings which allow us to feel like the chaos is held in check, but when we allow those structures to crumble, we might be able to perceive our own center, a place of emptiness and profound silence, a place of the deepest rest where self-interest and even self-awareness has not yet entered. This is not a void, but rather a darkness where things are not yet differentiated or seen. In Jewish thought, this void is the Ein Sof, the undifferentiated chaos from which the world emerged and to which it will ultimately return. We once had a grand, magnificent temple that stood in Jerusalem. It was the axis mundi, the literal physical center of the world, until it was razed to the ground, then it was rebuilt, then it was razed to the ground again, a cycle of destruction that we mourn every summer on Tisha B'Av. That orderly structure fell, inevitably, but at the center of that temple, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, was the sanctuary of silence, the available void, which was always the actual center of our worship. The temple has long fallen, and if it is ever rebuilt, it will fall again. But that sanctuary of silence endures, as it ever will. Recognizing and even worshiping that void, that silent sanctuary, where nothing is known or knowable, is not an abdication of responsibility. Far from it. Rather, in line with the Rambam, it is an awareness that the world in which we know things is just a small part of the universe. It is the awareness that we live in Mark Watney's greenhouse, and while we might experience predictable order inside of it, there is a vast arena in which we can't know what's going on, and more importantly, our misguided efforts to impose a false order on a chaotic universe are both heretical and harmful. There is no one fixed absolute order that is true in all times and all places. There is, at most, a provisional guess based on the little bit we know, underneath which is the terrifying, necessary, beautiful, watery chaos. Now, I can say all these things, but while I love watching my kids embrace the chaos of life as they fly off the end of a rope swing into the water, the truth is the chaos terrifies me. I've spent enough time in hospitals and graveyards to know that chaos, while occasionally romantic, usually brings tremendous pain and loss with it. There's nothing romantic about the chaos of COVID. Like Mark Watney on Mars, we live in a small bubble of order within a vast ocean of chaos. Unlike Watney, however, we are not only ignorant of, but generally resistant to acknowledging the chaos beyond the thin mylar walls of our reality. There are, however, those caesural moments when the Martian air comes rushing in, the waters of the Tehom come surging up, and we realize that the order on which our lives are predicated can be washed away in an instant. The structures of the temple fell, as did Brother Juniper's moral economy, as does the barren order of King David's magic. The chaos of the Tehom is always here. There's no real reason why this person and not that person died on a bridge in Peru, or in a 12-story building in Miami, or in a global pandemic. But the only life we can possibly live is inside that greenhouse, with its limited, attenuated order. We are, after all, but dust and ashes. We emerged from that primordial chaos, and one day, hopefully far in the future, we will return to it. Mark Watney's greenhouse didn't conquer the Martian chaos, but it did carve out a very small arena in which Watney could live. However limited our order is, it is only inside that order that we can live. Thornton Wilder ends his tale of Brother Juniper by saying, "Love is the only survival, the only meaning. And indeed, love is the only thing I can know for certain, perhaps the only thing worth knowing." The real problem with Mark Watney's greenhouse was not that its order was limited and contingent. That's the reality we are all always in. The problem with the greenhouse was that he was entirely isolated, with no human contact or connection. Judaism's greatest articulation of the fundamental inscrutability of the universe is known as the voice out of the whirlwind, in which the Holy One chastises Job for daring to ask, why did he suffer so? What is the order in this? The Holy One thundered at Job for speaking without knowledge and assuming that there must be some order to which even the Holy One is bound. The book of Job ends with the Holy One's profound declaration, there is no ultimate order. The book of Job ends on that note, but the Torah doesn't. Immediately after Job's recognition that the painful chaos of the universe will endure is Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, opening with the line, "Give me the kisses of your mouth, for your love is sweeter than wine." We love in many forms. We love our partners and our friends, our children and our parents. We find happiness in many, many wonderful forms of connection, but our happiness and well-being rest on those human connections. There's enormous chaos in the universe and very, very little order. But the apparent order of the world is where we live and where we have space to connect with each other, to allow that divine electricity to surge between us. In this coming year, may we draw invigoration from the chaos of this world. May we find sanctuaries of silence, greenhouses that help us keep the chaos at bay. And in the pockets of order we do experience, may we find the love we seek. Gemar Chatima Tova.